Before the universe had a shape, before time began to move, before even the questions humans rely on to understand the world had learned how to form, there was a void, or at least that is what we have chosen to call it. In modern life, our minds often inhabit a similar state. Too much noise, too much information, too many questions demanding answers each day. At a certain point, the fatigue no longer comes from the body, but from the constant need to understand everything. Tonight, you do not need to understand anything more. This video is not a lecture on cosmology. It is a slow journey where philosophy, science, and silence meet, returning together to an ancient question. How did nothing exist before the Big Bang? And more importantly, was nothing ever truly empty as we tend to imagine? As you listen, let the questions be spoken like a whisper. There is no need to answer them right away. No need to remember. Simply allow them to drift through your mind the way stars continue their quiet passage through the night. As a philosopher once asked, why is there something rather than nothing? Perhaps tonight you do not need to search for an answer. You only need to remain in the silence long enough for sleep to find you on its own. Before the universe had a shape, before light knew how to call itself by name, before the very first moment when time began to flow forward, there was a silence. Not the familiar kind of silence we know, not the absence of sound in a darkened room. Not the pause between two breaths, but a silence far deeper than that. A silence in which even the ideas of before and after did not yet exist, and therefore could not be used to draw any distinction at all. When we think about the origin of the universe, the mind often rushes to search for an image, an explosion, a point of light, a sudden flare igniting within nothingness. But tonight you do not need to imagine anything. Simply remain with the question very lightly, like a thin veil of mist brushing against the mind. What was there before the Big Bang? And then almost as soon as that question appears, another follows quietly behind it. Just as important is that question truly valid. In modern life, we are deeply accustomed to asking questions in the language of time. What came before? What will come after? Which cause led to which effect? Everything is arranged into sequences linked together like train cars moving steadily along an invisible track. But if time itself, the track, only began to exist alongside the Big Bang, then what meaning does the word before still hold? Here the question is no longer a tool for finding an answer. It becomes a doorway opening onto our very human confusion when we stand before something that exceeds intuition. When we speak of nothing, we usually imagine emptiness, a space without objects, without sound, without motion. Yet even that emptiness is still something. It still exists within space. It still unfolds within time. It still has boundaries we can point to and say, there is nothing. Nothing before the Big Bang. If such a concept can exist at all, is not like this. It is not an empty room within the universe, not a stretch of space waiting to be filled. It is a state in which space itself, time itself, and even the possibility of existence had not yet appeared. At this point, philosophy begins to whisper. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, in a question that has echoed across centuries, once wrote, "Why is there something rather than nothing?" Essays on the goodness of God, the freedom of man, and the origin of evil. This is not merely a scientific question. It does not seek a formula, an equation, or a cosmological model. It touches something deeper: why existence happens at all, when nothingness, at least in theory, seems like the easier state. When Leibniz asked this, he was not expecting a quick answer. And tonight you do not need to search for one either. Let the question rest there like a small candle placed in the dark, not to illuminate everything, but simply to remind us that we are standing within a space far wider than daily worries, wider than tomorrow's to-do list. At the deepest layer of this question lies something profoundly human, the exhaustion of always needing to understand, to control, to explain. We live in a noisy world of meaning. Everything must have a reason. Every emotion must have a name. Every moment must be optimized. And eventually the mind grows tired, not from a lack of information, but from an excess of answers. Perhaps that is why the question of nothing holds such a strange pull. Not because it promises a solution, but because it opens the possibility that no solution is required at all. If there was no time before the Big Bang, then there is no before to return to. If there was no space, then there is nowhere to search. And if even our familiar conceptual frameworks did not yet exist, then perhaps the only thing that remains is pure silence. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote, "Whereof one cannot speak thereof, one must be silent." Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. There are things not because we lack the intelligence to speak of them, but because language itself was never born to reach them. The question of nothing before the Big Bang may be one of those things. And as you lie here now in the gentle darkness of night, you do not need to carry the ambition of understanding the universe. You do not need to resolve a question that has puzzled scientists and philosophers for thousands of years. Just notice one small thing. When you allow yourself not to understand, the mind begins to settle. Much like the universe itself, before the first light appeared, there may have been a moment not of time, but of potential. A silence in which everything could happen, yet nothing needed to happen at all. And within that silence, just like now, you are allowed to set the question down very gently, not because it is unimportant, but because it has completed its work. So that as thought slows, as the stream of ideas grows sparse, you may allow silence to continue in your place and do the rest of the night for you. As the silence before time continues to linger in the mind, we may take one step further, not to move faster, but to look more closely at the very word we have been using almost without noticing. Nothing. A short word. A light sound. And yet, one of the most misleading concepts humanity has ever created. In everyday life, when we say there is nothing, we usually know exactly what we mean. No new messages, no one in the room, no sound outside the window. Here, nothing is not frightening. It is simply the absence of something we were expecting, a thing, a sound, an event. But this very familiarity becomes the first trap. Because the human mind has a deeply natural habit, we take what we already know from experience and use it to fill questions that lie far beyond that experience. When we hear the phrase, "nothing before the Big Bang," we imagine an empty space, a black background, a silent expanse, somewhere with nothing inside it. But pause here very gently. The moment you imagine an empty space, you have already placed nothing inside space. The moment you think of before, you have already placed it inside time. And this is precisely where the trouble begins. Language, the very tool that allows us to connect, to share, to understand one another, was born to describe a world that already exists. It was shaped to speak of objects, motion, causes, and effects. It works beautifully when we talk about trees, people, memories, and pain. But when we use that same system to speak of absolute absence, language begins to tremble. The philosopher Martin Heidegger touched this unease when he wrote, "The nothing itself, nothings." What is metaphysics? The sentence sounds like a paradox, even faintly unsettling, but Heidegger was not trying to confuse his reader. He was simply pointing out that even when we attempt to speak of nothing, we are still using verbs, structures, and patterns of thought that belong to something. Language cannot step outside existence in order to describe non-existence. And so when we say nothing, what we usually mean is not absolute nothingness, but the absence of something specific. No object, but still space. No event, but still time flowing. No sound, but still someone listening. This is the subtle yet crucial difference between the absence of objects and the absence of existence itself. The absence of objects is still a state of the world. The absence of existence leaves no world at all to speak of. At this point, our intuition begins to resist, because the entirety of human experience takes place within a context that already exists. Even a dream requires a dreamer. Even the emptiness of the mind is felt by a consciousness that is present. The psychologist Carl Jung once wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "The unconscious is not simply the unknown, it is the unknowable. There are things that are not merely not yet known, but cannot be known in the way we are accustomed to knowing. Nothing in its absolute sense may be one of those things. When language can no longer carry us, when images begin to collapse, the mind tends to do the next thing it knows how to do, either attempt control through concepts or fall into anxiety. But tonight, you do not need to do either. Instead of forcing nothing to take on a shape, try listening to the smallest reaction in your body when you allow that word to remain undefined. A slight softening in the chest, a breath slowing down, a feeling of not needing to hold on to any image at all. Perhaps the difficulty is not that nothing is too hard to understand, but that the mind has grown too accustomed to everything needing to be understood. In daily life, we are constantly filling gaps with information, with plans, with thoughts about tomorrow. But the universe, at least at its beginning, may not have been in such a hurry. And when we speak of nothing before the Big Bang, perhaps what matters is not defining precisely what it was, but recognizing this instead, our thinking has reached the edge of itself. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once reminded us, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. Perhaps nothing is not an object waiting to be found, but a sign that the world of language is pausing ever so gently to make room for a different kind of listening. A listening that does not require interpretation, does not require analysis, does not require an immediate answer. As you lie here in the peaceful darkness of the night, you may let the word nothing pass through your mind without needing to hold on to it. Not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a silence to be respected. And within that silence, as language rests for a moment, as intuition is no longer forced to understand, a very small piece may begin to appear. From there, we will slowly move toward another story, one in which ancient philosophy begins to face this unease directly, and where for the first time humanity learns to fear the very emptiness it cannot name. But that is a story for the next part. When the word nothing has begun to reveal its difficulties, when modern language no longer feels steady enough to carry the idea of nothingness, we may turn back to a very distant place, not to find answers, but to listen to how ancient thinkers once faced the void. There, nothingness was not an intriguing idea. It was something unsettling. In ancient philosophy, particularly for Aristotle, the notion of an absolute emptiness, a complete vacuum, was not something to be explored, but something to be avoided. Aristotle lived in a world where order was the foundation of understanding. Everything had a purpose. Every movement had a cause. Every form of existence belonged to a tightly woven web of meaning. And in such a world, absolute nothingness was a dangerous gap. He is famously associated with the view often summarized as nature abhors a vacuum. Physics. Aristotle. This was not merely a physical observation. It reflected a deeper fear, the fear that if a total void were allowed to exist, the order of the world itself might collapse. For Aristotle, space was not an empty container waiting to be filled. Space was always the place where a body was present. If there was no body, there was nowhere to call space. And so the idea of a vacuum, a place with nothing at all, was to him impossible. But this does not mean that Aristotle never spoke of nothingness. It simply means that his nothingness was very different from what we tend to imagine today. In ancient thought, nothingness was not absolute non-existence, but the absence of a particular form, quality, or state. An uncarved block of stone lacks the form of the statue. A seed that has not yet sprouted lacks the shape of the tree. Nothingness in this sense is always tied to something that exists, but has not yet become what it could become. Aristotle called this privation a lack and incompleteness. Not absolute nothingness, but an emptiness within being itself. And from this, an important consequence follows. If nothingness is only a lack within existence, then the idea that something could arise from absolute nothingness becomes nearly impossible. In most ancient philosophical systems, creation never begins from zero. It is always a rearrangement, a transformation, or a revealing of something that already exists. Even in mythological or religious traditions, the world is often born from chaos, from primordial waters, from an original substance, rarely from a completely empty nothing. This was not because ancient people lacked imagination. It was because their intuition, much like ours, could not accept a leap from absolute non-existence to full existence. Beneath this lies a deep unease. If something can arise from absolute nothingness, then what guarantees that it cannot vanish back into that nothingness at any moment? If existence has no foundation, then on what do meaning, order, and stability rest? And so ancient philosophy chose to close the door to nothingness. Not because it lacked curiosity, but because it needed a world that could stand. At this point, there is a subtle parallel with the modern human psyche. We too often fear empty spaces, gaps in our schedules, gaps in our relationships, gaps in the answer to the question, who am I? We rush to fill them with plans, with explanations, with stories about ourselves, not because emptiness is always dangerous, but because it takes away our footing. The philosopher Parmenides, a figure before Aristotle, once declared, what is, what is not, is not. Parmenides. That short statement almost slammed shut every door leading to absolute nothingness. What does not exist cannot be spoken of, cannot be thought, cannot serve as the ground of anything at all. And for centuries, this stance kept Western thought within a world where existence always had to have roots. But tonight, as you listen to this story, you do not need to side with Aristotle, nor do you need to argue against him. Just notice something very gently. The fear of nothingness is not only a philosophical fear, it is a deeply human one. The fear that without a foundation, we will fall. The fear that without meaning, everything will dissolve. And perhaps that is why the question of nothing had to wait so long, waiting until science, psychology, and the weariness of modern life grew large enough for it to be asked again. But before we step into those new questions, allow yourself to remain a little longer in this ancient world, a world where nothingness was kept at a safe distance, where order was valued over mystery, and where humans learned to live by believing that existence must always rest on a foundation. From that foundation, another question will slowly emerge, lighter yet deeper. If nothingness cannot exist in the way the ancients believed, why does the question of it continue to return again and again to the human mind? That will be the story of the next part. When the ancient world had closed the door on nothingness in order to protect order, when nothing was kept at a safe distance as something not to be dwelled upon, the question did not disappear. It simply withdrew more deeply, waiting for a moment when it could return more gently yet with greater resonance. In the 17th century, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz gave that question a surprisingly simple form. Why is there something rather than nothing? Principles of nature and grace, based on reason, no imagery, no metaphor, no ornate introduction, just a bare question standing still like a small stone placed in the current of every theory. Leibniz was not asking about the birth of stars. He was not asking about the beginning of the universe. He was asking about something deeper than all of that existence itself. This question does not point to an event in time. It points to the very ground that allows any event to happen at all. And what makes it so distinctive is the strange feeling it evokes, that nothingness seems like the more natural state. If there were nothing at all, there would be no laws to uphold, no energy to account for, no reasons to supply. Nothing would need explaining. Something by contrast, existence requires countless conditions to stand laws, structures, causes, order, and an apparently endless chain of explanations. For this reason, Leibniz's question is not a casual curiosity. It arises from a deep intuition. If nothingness is the easiest state, then why is there existence? And more urgently, why are we here within a world where there is something at all? At this point, the question touches a very different layer. It is no longer a question of cosmology. It becomes a human question, a question of consciousness awake in the night. As you lie still and listen, you may feel that precariousness clearly between is and is not, between presence and absence, between the fact that everything exists and the possibility that none of it ever needed to exist. Centuries after Leibniz, the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre expressed this unease in a very different voice when he wrote, "Being is without reason, without cause, and without necessity. Being and nothingness." From this perspective, existence has no compulsory reason for happening. It is not an inevitable outcome. It is simply here, and it is precisely this lack of necessity that makes Leibniz's question so haunting. If existence is not required, then it resembles a fragile gift, ungrounded, unguaranteed, preserved by nothing other than its own continuation. Perhaps this is why modern people often feel a fatigue that is difficult to name. Not a weariness from a lack of meaning, but from the fact that meaning itself has no absolute foundation. We must construct it day after day within a world where even existence seems to lack a final explanation. Leibniz, shaped by the spirit of his time, sought an answer in a sufficient reason, often linked to the idea of God. Yet what is striking is this: even with such an answer, the question does not vanish. Because it is not merely asking who created the universe, it is asking why existence happens at all. At its deepest level, this is not a question about cause, but about the sheer improbability of being. And perhaps for that very reason, the question can never be fully resolved. It was not born to be closed, but to open a space where our need for certainty can pause, where we do not require an eternal foundation to stand upon, where we can admit that existence itself is strange. The philosopher Albert Camus once wrote, "The literal meaning of life is whatever you're doing that prevents you from killing yourself." The myth of Sisyphus. This line is not meant to produce despair. It points directly to a truth. Meaning does not arise from a final answer, but from continuing to live in the absence of one. When we revisit Leibniz's question in this light, it no longer feels like a challenge to be conquered. It becomes an invitation to accept that existence does not need to be perfectly rational in order to be valuable, that the fact there is something fragile, unnecessary, contingent is already enough to ground experience, emotion, and the quiet sleep of this night. As you listen to that question, you do not need to carry it into tomorrow. You do not need to keep it as a philosophical burden. Simply let it remain here in this gentle darkness like a slow breath. Perhaps nothingness is not something to fear, and existence does not need to justify itself. Perhaps it is enough to know that among countless possibilities of not is has occurred. And that single fact, even without a final explanation, is enough to let you softly close your eyes and allow existence itself to continue in your place and do the rest of the night for you. As the surprise of existence continues to ripple through the mind, human beings begin to do what they have always done when faced with what cannot be grasped. They turn to observation, not to deny philosophy, but to seek another way, quieter, more concrete, to approach the emptiness that once unsettled them. And so science enters the scene. At first, science did not arrive with bold gestures. It did not declare the overthrow of nothingness, nor did it challenge the ancient philosophers head-on. It asked a smaller, humbler question: does emptiness truly exist? In classical physics, deeply influenced by Aristotle, the idea of a vacuum was still viewed with suspicion. Space was assumed to always be filled with air, with ether, with some invisible substance, so that the world would not collapse into chaos. But there were those who were dissatisfied with this assumption. They did not wish to argue further through concepts. They wanted to see. The 17th century marked a quiet turning point, not through grand proclamations, but through simple, patient experiments. Evangelista Torricelli, a student of Galileo, performed what seemed like an ordinary act. He poured mercury into a glass tube, inverted it into a bowl of mercury, and observed. The upper part of the tube, where the mercury did not reach, contained no air, no liquid, nothing the eye could perceive. And emptiness appeared not in reasoning, but in reality. Blaise Pascal continued these experiments, carrying them to the tops of mountains to demonstrate that atmospheric pressure changes with altitude and that the empty space observed was no illusion. There were no heated debates, no triumphant declarations. Only something small yet irreversible, a vacuum, could exist. In that moment, a very old door opened, the door philosophy had once closed to preserve order. But what mattered was not that science had proven Aristotle wrong. What mattered was the way science approached nothingness. Science did not ask what is nothingness in its essence. It asked instead, what happens when we gradually remove what can be observed? The emptiness of classical science was not absolute nothingness. It was simply a place where familiar matter was absent. No air, no liquid, no visible objects. Yet space remained. Time continued. Laws still operated. And it was precisely this humility that allowed science to advance. Francis Bacon, one of the founders of modern scientific thinking, once wrote, "Nature to be commanded must be obeyed. Novum organum." Science does not force nature to fit preconceived ideas. It learns to listen, to observe, and to accept what appears, even when it unsettles long-held intuitions. Here, a subtle yet profound shift takes place from nothingness as a terrifying concept to emptiness as a phenomenon that can be studied. The void is no longer a philosophical abyss. It becomes a silent object on the laboratory table. And as fear diminishes, curiosity begins to speak. Human beings discover that the presence of emptiness does not cause the world to collapse. Objects do not vanish. Laws do not cease to function. The world remains simply emptier in certain places. This shift does not occur only in laboratories. It mirrors something deeply human. We too often fear the empty spaces within ourselves, moments when we do not know what to do next. Silences within relationships, nights without answers to the question, what now? Yet when we dare to stay with that emptiness without rushing to fill it, we often find it is far less dangerous than we imagined. Classical science, through its slow and practical approach, inadvertently performs something healing. It allows emptiness to exist without mythologizing it or driving it away. Still, this also introduces a new limit. The vacuum of classical physics remains a state within an already existing world. It does not touch Leibniz's question. It says nothing about why existence exists at all. It only says this: even when we remove the familiar, we have not yet reached absolute nothingness. And it is precisely here, when science has stepped one foot into emptiness, but has not yet walked the entire path, that something new begins to form, very slowly, very quietly. The realization that emptiness is not the end of understanding, but an open space. A space where questions may continue to be asked, but with a different rhythm, less fear, less absolutism. As you lie here listening to this story, you may feel that shift within yourself as well. From fearing emptiness to allowing it to be present. From the need to understand everything to the permission not to understand just yet. Science has not answered the question of nothing, but it has done something equally important. It has taught us that not every empty space needs to be filled immediately. And within that gentle emptiness between philosophy and experiment, between question and observation, a new chapter of the story waits quietly. A chapter in which nothing will no longer be merely absence, but will begin to whisper of something far more unexpected. But that is the story of the next part. When classical science had finally allowed emptiness to exist when the vacuum was no longer taboo, but became something observable, humanity believed it had reached the final boundary of nothing. A quiet place, a pure emptiness, an empty stage on which objects could appear and disappear. But the universe, as it so often does, chose to whisper a different story. As the 20th century arrived and science moved deeper into the realm of the very small, it became clear that the quiet we had imagined was only a subtle illusion. At the deepest layer of reality, no emptiness ever truly stands still. Werner Heisenberg's uncertainty principle opened that door with what seemed like a modest statement that we cannot simultaneously know both the exact position and momentum of a particle. Yet hidden within that modesty was a radical shift in how humans understand the world. Heisenberg once wrote, "What we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning." Physics and philosophy. Here, uncertainty is not a flaw in our instruments. It is not a limitation of the observer. It is a fundamental property of nature itself. And when that principle is applied to the vacuum, something strange emerges. Even when no particles exist in the classical sense, energy cannot be exactly zero. The vacuum cannot be perfectly silent. It is always fluctuating ever so gently like the surface of water, even when there is no wind. From these fluctuations, virtual particles appear. They come from nowhere. They do not remain long enough to be seen. They are born and vanish in intervals so brief that even time itself barely manages to register them. Yet their existence is not poetic metaphor. It is mathematics, an unavoidable consequence of the equations that describe reality. Here, nothing begins to look busy. The emptiness that classical science once treated as a blank backdrop is now understood as a microscopic ocean where energy constantly ripples, where potential never truly rests. And then there was one small quiet experiment that confirmed this beyond doubt. Two metal plates placed parallel to each other, extremely close inside a vacuum. No electric current, no obvious applied force, no classical reason for movement, and yet they attract each other. The Casimir effect requires no elaborate explanation. It simply reveals a gentle but profound truth. The energy of the vacuum is not zero. Emptiness is not an empty stage. It is the lowest energy state, but it is still energy. At this point, the word nothing begins to lose its familiar meaning. Because if the vacuum contains energy, if it can generate force, if it can give rise to particles that flicker in and out of existence, then what remains that can truly be called empty? Yet rather than creating confusion, this discovery carries an unexpected healing quality. It shows us that even in the place we imagine as most barren, there is still movement, still potential, still a quiet form of life. And perhaps we, at another level of existence, are not so different. There are moments in life when we feel completely empty, no motivation, no meaning, no answers. But just like the quantum vacuum, that emptiness is rarely absolute nothingness. More often, it is a low energy state, a place where movement has not yet taken form, but potential remains. The quantum vacuum does not need an external hand to set it in motion. It fluctuates on its own. It creates and dissolves itself. And this brings us very close to our original question. If nothing in the deepest physical sense already contains energy, already contains instability, already was never completely still, then the emergence of something no longer feels so mysterious. Not because of a miraculous push, but because nothing itself was never a final resting point. Here, science does not answer philosophy with denial. It answers with a whisper, perhaps we were asking the wrong kind of nothing. The nothingness of human intuition, empty, silent, with nothing happening, is not the nothingness of nature. Nature seems incapable of complete stillness. Even in emptiness, it moves, it experiments, it opens tiny possibilities. As you listen to this story in the night, you do not need to remember the terminology. You do not need to hold on to the names of effects or principles. Just feel one simple thing. Emptiness, whether in the universe or within yourself, does not have to be an ending. It can be a form of rest, a low energy ground, a quiet pause before something very gentle begins to move. And when you allow yourself to remain with that emptiness without rushing to fill it, without needing to understand, you are doing what the universe itself has done for a very long time, allowing potential to exist in silence. From here, the story will go even deeper into the nature of invisible fields and the quiet foundations that hold everything we call reality. But tonight it is enough to know this even nothing was never completely empty. And in that small realization, You may let your mind settle like a gentle space, softly whispering the first movements of sleep. When nothing has been revealed as an emptiness that is never truly still, when the quantum vacuum whispers that even silence contains movement, a new question begins to emerge very gently. It is no longer about why existence exists, but about what truly exists at the deepest level. In our ordinary intuition, we imagine the world as being made of tiny marbles, fundamental particles as solid points colliding and bouncing, existing independently within an empty space that surrounds them. This image feels reassuring. It gives us clear boundaries. One object here, another object there, a world assembled from separate pieces. But as science moves deeper into the foundation of reality, that image slowly dissolves quietly without drama, like morning mist fading in the early light. In modern physics, particles are no longer independent marbles. They are ripples, vibrations, fleeting expressions of something far deeper. That deeper reality is called a field. A field is not an object. It has no clear shape. It does not sit still in a particular place. It is present everywhere, even in the places we imagine to be most empty. Every kind of particle we know is simply one way in which a particular field vibrates. An electron does not exist as a tiny bead. It is a vibration of the electron field. A photon is a vibration of the electromagnetic field. And the universe at its deepest level is not a collection of objects, but a symphony of fields in motion. Here, the idea of foundation begins to change its meaning. A foundation is no longer something that supports objects. It is something from which objects arise. And this brings us back to nothing in an entirely different way. If fields are the fundamental reality, then the empty state of the universe is not nothing at all. It is simply a state in which fields rest at their lowest energy. They do not vibrate strongly, they do not manifest clearly, but they are still there. The vacuum understood this way is not the absence of existence, but the quietness of fields, a quietness that is never absolute, a silence that still carries the potential to vibrate. The physicist and philosopher Erwin Schrödinger once wrote, "What we observe as material bodies and forces are nothing but shapes and variations in the structure of space, nature, and the Greeks." Though his language belongs to another era, the intuition still resonates clearly. Matter is not the most fundamental thing. Shape movement and deeper structure are. When we see the world this way, the boundary between something and nothing softens. There is no sharp cut between existence and non-existence. Instead, there are only different degrees of expression. Some states are noisy, where fields vibrate strongly and particles appear clearly. Other states are very quiet, where fields are nearly silent, yet never gone. This perspective carries a strange and healing sense. It shows us that silence does not mean emptiness. Stillness does not mean nothingness. Non-appearance does not necessarily mean non-existence. In our inner lives, we may recognize moments like this as well, times with no clear thoughts, no strong emotions, no story unfolding in the mind. We often call this emptiness, and sometimes we fear it. But seen through the lens of quantum fields, it may simply be a low-energy state of the mind. Not busy, not vibrating intensely, yet still alive, still present, still capable of stirring when needed. The philosopher Baruch Spinoza once wrote, "Nothing in nature is contingent, but all things are determined from the necessity of the divine nature." Ethics. Though Spinoza knew nothing of quantum fields, his intuition touched something close. Existence is not a collection of separate fragments, but a continuous system, an unbroken flow. In such a world, nothing is no longer the absolute opposite of something. It is simply a very quiet region of the same reality. And when we allow ourselves to rest in that quiet region without forcing ourselves to vibrate, without demanding expression, we align with the way the universe operates at its deepest level. You do not need to understand the equations. You do not need to remember the names of the fields. You do not need to distinguish between particles and waves. Just keep one gentle sense that even when everything seems to settle, that settling itself is still a form of presence. Within that quiet presence, there is no pressure to become, no demand to explain, only a calm ground steady enough for all possibilities to arise or for nothing to arise at all. From here, the story will travel even further into the moment when space and time begin to reveal themselves, and the Big Bang is seen not as an explosion, but as a deep movement of this very foundation. But tonight, you do not need to go any further. Simply allow your mind to remain in its lowest energy state, not empty, just quiet, and let the silent fields of sleep gently begin to vibrate in their own way. When we have grown accustomed to the idea that reality is not made of separate fragments, but of a continuous ground that vibrates ever so gently, the story of the Big Bang can be told again in a different way. In popular imagination, the Big Bang often appears as an explosion, a tiny point in nothingness, a violent flash of light, matter flying outward in every direction, rushing into an infinite empty space around it. It is a powerful image, but it is also very human, because we are used to thinking that things happen somewhere, and that they happen within a space that already exists. We are familiar with explosions, bombs, fireworks, meteors, which always require a stage on which to erupt. But the Big Bang is not like that. It did not happen in space. It is the moment when space itself began to exist. There is no center you can point to, no edge from which to stand outside and observe. There is no outside the universe waiting in advance. Every place is a place of beginning, and no place is the center. If you imagine the universe like the surface of a balloon being inflated, then every point on that surface is moving away from every other point. No point is more special than another. No absolute center exists. The Big Bang in this sense is not an explosion in space, but the expansion of space itself. A very quiet expansion. No bang, no flash. Just the distance between everything slowly growing. Here, another familiar intuition begins to falter. If space began with a Big Bang, then the question where was it before no longer has a place to stand. And if time also began at that same moment, then the word before may have lost the meaning we usually give it. Stephen Hawking once expressed this with a simple image when he wrote, "Asking what came before the Big Bang is like asking what is north of the North Pole." A brief history of time. Not because the question is foolish, but because it assumes a coordinate system that no longer exists at that point. It is like asking, before you woke up, where were you inside the dream? The question is not grammatically wrong, but it applies the wrong context. When time begins together with the Big Bang, every notion of before and after becomes a product of that very flow. This can feel overwhelming, but if we slow down, it also carries a strangely comforting message. It suggests that there was no moment before in which the universe had to wait in nothingness, no delay, no forgotten gap. Space and time appeared together like two sides of a single movement. The philosopher Immanuel Kant, long before modern physics was born, touched on this intuition when he wrote that space and time are not independent things that exist on their own, but forms through which we experience the world. In Critique of Pure Reason, Kant set limits on what we can meaningfully ask once we step beyond the conditions of experience. Here, modern science and classical philosophy meet in a shared quiet. There are questions that cannot be extended indefinitely without breaking the very framework on which they depend. And the Big Bang, when understood this way, is no longer a primordial catastrophe, but an opening. A movement in which the foundation of reality begins to expand itself, not because it was pushed from outside, but because its own structure allowed it. In our personal lives, we sometimes experience very quiet Big Bangs as well. Moments that are not loud shocks, but subtle shifts in how we experience time. Events that cause before and after to no longer connect in the same way. There are experiences, loss awakening, or simply deep exhaustion that make it impossible to return to who we were before. Not because we do not want to, but because the inner flow of time has taken on a different shape. Perhaps the universe went through such a moment too. And what matters is this: it did not need an external place in order to begin. It did not need a prior time to prepare itself. It only needed the capacity for expansion that was already present within its own foundation. As you listen to this story in the night, you do not need to imagine the entire universe. You do not need to find a center. You do not need to place yourself anywhere special. Just feel one gentle truth. Not every beginning is an explosion. Some beginnings are simply a slow opening, a space allowed to become wider, a time allowed to flow. And if the time of the universe began like this, then perhaps your time tonight does not need to be rushed either. No need to return to the past. No need to worry about the future. No need to ask what came before. Just remain in this moment where time moves slowly enough that you do not need to hold on to it. From here, the story will continue toward deeper limits, where even the laws themselves begin to blur, and before the Big Bang becomes a question that no longer needs to be answered in the usual way. But for now, as space has widened enough and time has slowed enough, you may allow your thoughts to gently dissolve into the fabric of the night. Not like an explosion, but like a very quiet opening. When the Big Bang is no longer imagined as an explosion, when space and time are understood as having unfolded together, a very small, very dark point begins to appear at the edge of every description. Not as a place, but as a boundary. It is called a singularity, not because it is strange in a mystical sense, but because there the familiar laws of physics no longer operate in the way we know. At a singularity, density becomes infinite. The curvature of space-time exceeds anything that can be measured. Equations begin to yield numbers that no longer carry physical meaning. Not because the universe becomes chaotic, but because our language has reached its limit. A singularity is not a thing within the universe. It is a sign that our current tools, theories, concepts, intuitions are no longer sufficient to go further. Here, a very common misunderstanding often arises. People imagine a singularity as the very first moment, an absolute instant, a clearly defined beginning. But in modern physics, a singularity is not an observed event. It is the boundary of a model. It is like a dot on a map where the cartographer must stop and write. Beyond this point, our map no longer applies. Stephen Hawking was direct about this when he wrote, "The singularity is a place where the laws of physics break down. A brief history of time." Not because nature stops obeying rules, but because the rules we are using are not yet deep enough to describe what is happening. And it is precisely here that the question before the Big Bang touches another boundary, the boundary of human understanding. Because to ask before we need time, to ask where we need space, to ask what happened, we need stable laws. But if all of these only begin to have meaning after the Big Bang, then the question before the Big Bang may already carry a mistaken assumption from the start. Hawking expressed this with a comparison that is gentle yet profound. Asking what came before the Big Bang is like asking what is north of the North Pole, a brief history of time. Not because the north of the North Pole is forbidden, but because the concept of north no longer exists there. In the same way before may no longer have meaning when time itself has not yet begun. This comparison does not slam the door on the question, it simply repositions it. It invites us to see that some questions are not wrong, but are asked within a coordinate system that no longer applies. Philosophy reached this moment long before modern physics emerged. Immanuel Kant, in Critique of Pure Reason, pointed out that human reason tends to overstep its own limits, and when it does, it falls into questions that cannot be answered by experience or concepts. He called these antinomies irreconcilable contradictions that arise when we try to use the tools of the phenomenal world to understand what lies beyond it. Seen this way, a singularity is not only a physical problem, it is a philosophical moment. A moment when science admits we do not know how to proceed along this path, and that if we slow down is not a failure. It is a form of honesty. In our inner lives, we have singularities as well, experiences that cannot be fully expressed in words, memories too heavy to fit into a coherent narrative, questions about the self for which every answer feels incomplete. We may call these moments crises, disorientation, existential fatigue, but we can also see them as the boundaries of inner language. Not places to be forced through, but places to be respected. The singularity of the universe and the singularity within the human being share something quietly profound. They both invite us to stop. Not to give up, but to recognize that not all understanding comes from going further. Some understanding comes from not insisting on crossing a boundary when the ground is not yet ready. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote, "Whereof one cannot speak thereof, one must be silent." Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. This is not an act of avoidance, it is an invitation to humility. Not every emptiness needs to be filled. Not every question requires an immediate answer. Not every blind spot is a mistake. Some blind spots mark the edge of light. As you lie here in the quiet of the night, you do not need to try to understand singularities. You do not need to hold on to the concept. You do not need to imagine what cannot be imagined. Just sense one very gentle truth. There are places in the universe and within yourself where not knowing is the most appropriate response. And within that not knowing, there is a very deep rest. No need to go north of the North Pole. No need to return to before time began. Simply remain with the present moment where the laws still operate gently enough for you to relax. From this boundary, another path will slowly open, not by breaking through the singularity, but by looking back at the entire story from a wider perspective. But tonight, as the questions have reached their own limits, you may let them rest here, not like a wall, but like a horizon. When we pause before the singularity not to conquer it, but to acknowledge that there are places where present-day science can only remain silent, another door begins to open very softly. Not the door of an absolute beginning, but the door of cycles. There, the Big Bang is no longer the story of a single appearance, but a breath within a larger rhythm. A contraction, an expansion, a dissolution, and then formation once more. In cyclic models of the universe, the cosmos is not born from absolute nothingness, nor does it vanish into eternal nothingness. It simply changes phase. Just as water does not disappear when it evaporates, but only shifts its state. Just as night does not destroy day, but temporarily replaces it. This idea is not new. It appeared quietly in ancient philosophy long before it was clothed in the mathematical language of modern physics. Heraclitus once said, "Everything flows a thought preserved in fragments of his writings." When extended to the scale of the cosmos, this flow suggests that existence does not require an absolute starting point to be meaningful. It only requires movement. In the Big Bounce model, the universe does not emerge from an infinite singularity, but from a state of maximal contraction. When density reaches an extreme threshold, instead of collapsing into infinity, the universe bounces back like a cosmic spring. There is no moment of nothing at all, only another moment. Here, nothing is not emptiness, but a physical phase in which familiar structures, space-time particles have not yet taken the forms we recognize. Like when you are in a very deep sleep with no dreams, no narrative, yet the mind has not vanished. It is simply resting at another level. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche imagined the universe not as a straight line, but as an eternal loop. He called this eternal recurrence, "This life as you now live it, and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more." Though Nietzsche was not speaking of cosmological physics, his idea touches the same deep intuition that existence may not need a single unique birth in order to carry meaning. Meaning may reside in return. In modern cyclic cosmologies, each cycle may unfold under slightly different conditions. Physical constants may shift, structures may vary. Yet existence continues without requiring a first time. And if that is so, then nothing which we often imagine as the most natural ground of all may never have been the universe's default state. Perhaps the most natural state is movement itself. This gently eases a very human anxiety, the fear of rupture, the fear that everything must begin from zero, the fear that without a clear starting point we do not know where we stand. But in a universe without an absolute beginning, there is no need to stand anywhere. We are simply passing through. Like a melody that does not require a first note to have rhythm. Like a breath that does not need to remember its first inhale in order to exhale. The philosopher Baruch Spinoza once wrote, "Whatever is in God, and nothing can be or be conceived without God." Ethics, Part 1. Though his language carries a theological tone, the core intuition denies absolute nothingness. Not because everything is full, but because existence does not require an initial void in order to begin unfolding. In these models, the Big Bang is not the first time something existed, but the most recent transition into a form of the universe that we are able to observe. Just as your memory does not begin on the day you were born, but on the day you became capable of remembering. What lies before memory is not nothingness. It is simply a form of existence that was not recorded. When we think this way, the obsession with what came before the Big Bang softens. Not because it has been definitively answered, but because the question no longer demands an answer with such weight. It becomes something to contemplate, not something to solve. And at a very deep level, the same is true of your inner life. Not every empty phase is a restart from zero. Not every silence is a loss. Some silences are simply transitions between two breaths, between fatigue and recovery, between two versions of yourself. If the universe can pass through such phases without requiring absolute nothingness, then you need not fear the empty spaces within you. They are not endings, nor are they failures. They are places where movement is changing direction. And in this quiet night, as you allow your mind to settle, you do not need to determine whether you are at the beginning of a cycle or the end of one. It is enough to know this existence is still continuing softly, slowly, and safely enough for you to rest. In the next chapter, we will step away from the idea of grand cycles and move into a very subtle moment, the moment when, from the tiniest fluctuations of the vacuum, a universe might gently arise, not as an absolute beginning, but as a natural consequence of instability. But for now, you may let that idea wait somewhere beyond you. The night is still long, and the flow is in no hurry. If in the previous chapter we imagined the universe as a long, endless breath contracting, then opening here, we listen to something far more delicate, the moment in which a universe may arise not from absolute nothingness, but from a very small instability within what we habitually call nothing. In modern physics, inflation is not a loud story. It does not begin with a bang. It requires no flash of light, no familiar flow of time. It begins with a field. The inflation field is not an object. It has no shape. It cannot be grasped or pointed to. It is closer to a ground state, a latent condition embedded in the deepest structure of reality itself, a region of unstable energy undecided between remaining still or beginning to move. And in the quantum world, instability is not a flaw, it is the nature of things. The uncertainty principle tells us that even at the lowest possible state, nothing is ever completely at rest. Fluctuations are unavoidable. These fluctuations, tiny, fleeting, carry no intention of creating a universe. They simply occur. Yet sometimes, under very particular conditions, a fluctuation does not fade away like the others. It becomes amplified. In inflationary theory, the Big Bang is not the beginning of everything. It is the consequence of a process that had already begun when the inflation field slipped out of equilibrium and its energy was released into space matter and time as we know them. In other words, our universe did not emerge from nothing in the classical philosophical sense. It emerged from a structured vacuum, a quantum ground already rich with potential. This deeply reshapes how we understand beginnings. A beginning is no longer a mythical instant where everything suddenly appears out of absolute absence. A beginning becomes a transition, like when you are in deep sleep, no dreams, no awareness, and then very gently a faint image arises, not yet a dream, but enough to draw you back toward consciousness. The Big Bang in this view is like that moment, not when the mind begins to exist, but when it enters a new state. The physicist Alan Guth, who first proposed cosmic inflation, did not describe it as an explosion, but as a period of extremely rapid expansion of space. Space does not burst outward. It expands itself, and when space expands quickly enough, tiny quantum fluctuations are stretched to cosmic scales. They become the first imperfections, the earliest ripples, the seeds of structure. From those imperfections, everything familiar slowly forms galaxies, stars, planets, and eventually a consciousness capable of asking about its own beginning. There is a quiet beauty in this idea. The universe does not need an external touch, no hand to pull back a curtain. It needs only a small instability allowed to continue. The philosopher Martin Heidegger once asked, "Why are there beings at all instead of nothing?" Introduction to Metaphysics. In the light of inflation, this question no longer demands a final answer. It becomes a whisper, perhaps because nothing was never completely stable. Perhaps existence does not require an external reason to begin. It only requires conditions that allow it. If you listen closely, this can feel gently reassuring. You do not need a dramatic event to change. No grand beginning, no complete explanation. Sometimes all that is needed is a very small fluctuation deep within the mind, a thought not yet fully formed, a vague feeling, and if it is not extinguished too quickly, it can open an entirely new inner space. Seen this way, the Big Bang is not creation out of nothingness, but the unveiling of potential that was already present. Like when a sentence reaches you at exactly the right moment, it does not create a new person, but reveals a possibility that has long been there. The philosopher Spinoza once wrote, "Nothing in nature is random. A thing appears random only through the incompleteness of our knowledge." Ethics. Applied to cosmology, the Big Bang is not an absolute accident. It is the outcome of deeper laws we have only begun to glimpse. And just as in inner life, what we call sudden is often only the point at which a long, quiet process finally becomes visible. Here, nothing is no longer the opposite of something. It is an unexpressed state, a silent ground, a reservoir of potential. And if you are listening to these words late into the night, perhaps your mind is in a similar state. There is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to fully understand, no need to keep pace with every idea. Simply allow the smallest fluctuations to pass through, not to create a universe, but to let yourself rest within your own quiet space. In the next chapter, we will return to a more familiar world, to the traces science can touch, the leftover light, the first elements, the ancient marks of a universe once hot and dense. But for now, you do not need to carry any of that with you. Let your thoughts settle. Let the emptiness be gentle, and let sleep arrive as a natural consequence without a starting point, without a reason. After allowing the mind to drift through the delicate ideas of inflation and quantum fluctuations, we can slowly return to a very human question. How do we know not through intuition, not through belief, but through traces that are almost silent, still present, even after the universe has passed through billions of years? The Big Bang does not stand because it is beautiful. It stands because the universe continues to quietly confirm it day after day in subtle ways. These confirmations rest on three pillars, but not pillars of stone. They are more like three slow breaths, steady and patient. The first breath, the universe is expanding. When Edwin Hubble observed distant galaxies, he did not see a past explosion. He saw an ongoing motion. Light from those galaxies is stretched, shifted toward the red. Not because the galaxies are flying away through space, but because the space between them and us is itself expanding. Like ink dots on a soft fabric being gently pulled apart. There is no center, no outer edge, only distances growing wider. This carries a deep implication. If the universe is expanding today, then in the past it was closer together, denser, hotter. No need to imagine a mythical moment of creation, only to trace the motion backward. In doing so, we encounter the second pillar, a remnant memory of light. The cosmic microwave background, the CMB. When the universe was very young, it was not transparent. Light could not travel far. Everything was a hot, dense, opaque sea. Then came a very quiet moment when the universe cooled enough for electrons to remain bound to nuclei. Neutral atoms formed, and light was set free. That light did not vanish. It only cooled, stretched, became faint. And today, it is still here, arriving from every direction almost uniformly at a temperature just a few degrees above absolute zero. The CMB is not a dramatic signal. It is a very distant echo from a time when the universe had no stars, no planets, no observers to listen. When satellites such as COBE WMAP and later Planck measured its delicate structure, we did more than confirm the Big Bang. We glimpsed an infant photograph of the universe, slightly warmer regions, slightly cooler ones. Those fragile imperfections over billions of years became galaxies, star clusters, and all familiar forms. Here, the Big Bang is no longer an abstract hypothesis. It is a measurable memory. And then there is the third pillar, quiet, modest, yet extraordinarily precise, the abundance of light elements. Hydrogen, helium, a trace of lithium. The early universe had no time to create more. It expanded too quickly. It cooled too soon. In just the first few minutes, primordial nuclear reactions took place and then stopped. What is remarkable is that when we measure the proportions of these light elements today in ancient gas clouds, in regions never recycled by stars, they match almost perfectly what the Big Bang predicts. Not more, not less. No fine-tuning required, like an old recipe written down before anyone knew who would read it. These three pillars, expansion, leftover light, and chemical traces, do not prove the Big Bang with dramatic force. They support it with endurance. And that is why the model remains standing. Not because it explains everything. It does not explain what came before the Big Bang. It does not explain why the constants have their particular values. But it does not contradict what the universe continues to show us. In science, this is a rare form of humility. Carl Sagan once wrote, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself." The three pillars of the Big Bang are not only scientific evidence, they are the way the universe leaves traces so that it can be understood. And when we listen to those traces in the quiet of night, a gentle feeling may arise that the universe does not need to be perfect in order to tell its story. It only needs to be consistent for long enough. Much like your inner life, you do not need to remember every moment. You only need traces that feel true enough to know you have passed through. In the next chapter, we will follow the faint imperfections in the CMB, the soft ripples, to see how from those fragile deviations, galaxies, stars, and large-scale structures slowly formed. But for now, you do not need to carry any numbers with you. Just know this: the universe has left enough traces for us to trust without rushing to understand everything. And in that very gentle trust, the mind can slowly set its questions down, allowing sleep to arrive like a conclusion that needs no words. After the universe has left traces clear enough for us to trust that it was once hot, once dense, once young, a gentler question begins to arise. Not why the universe exists, but how a world so rich in form, texture, and difference could emerge from a state that was nearly uniform. The answer does not lie in violent collisions. It begins with things exceedingly small, so small that without enough time they would have faded like breath. In the cosmic microwave background we listened to in the previous chapter, there are regions that differ by only 1 part in 100,000. These primordial imperfections are not mistakes. not noise. They are seeds. Tiny quantum fluctuations stretched during inflation, then frozen as the universe gradually cooled. They were not uniform. And it is precisely this lack of uniformity that became the universe's first gift to structure. If everything had been perfectly even, if density had been identical everywhere, the universe would have remained smooth forever. No stars, no galaxies, no one to ask. At a very deep level, existence needs imperfection in order to take shape. The philosopher Plotinus once wrote of the world's emergence from the One, and though his language carries a mystical tone, the core idea is quietly clear. Multiplicity comes from unity not by loss, but by overflowing. The Enneads. The first imperfections were not a collapse of order, but an overflow of potential. As the universe continued to expand and cool, gravity began its silent work. In regions where density was just slightly higher, matter pulled matter very slowly, very patiently. And there is a presence we do not see, only feel through its effects, dark matter. Dark matter does not shine. It does not reflect. It does not announce itself. Yet it makes up most of the universe's mass. And because it does not interact with light, it was not smoothed out by radiation in the early universe. While ordinary matter was pushed and stirred by light, dark matter quietly began to clump. It became a gravitational scaffold, like the invisible framework of a city before there are buildings or lights already shaping the roads. When the universe cooled enough for atoms to form ordinary matter, hydrogen-helium could finally fall into the gravitational valleys that dark matter had prepared long before. There was no haste here, no conscious design, only simple laws repeated over long spans of time. And from this large scale, structures slowly appeared. Not randomness, not absolute order, a network. Galaxies are not evenly spread through space. They arrange themselves into filaments, nodes, and walls. Between them lie vast emptinesses, voids, where there is almost nothing. Seen from afar, the universe resembles a giant web light, delicate and silent. Scientists call it the cosmic web. What is remarkable is that this structure was not built in the usual sense. It emerged from very small fluctuations from gravity that is weak yet persistent from time so long that all urgency falls away. In a way, the universe grew up much like the human mind. Very small experiences, slight misalignments repeated long enough come to shape the entire inner structure. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Collected works. In the universe, what is invisible, dark matter, quantum fluctuations guided everything visible. In inner life, what we do not name often arranges every story. There is something gently reassuring in this. Complexity does not need to be forced. It can arise from the simplest conditions. A universe does not need to be perfect, only a little uneven. A person does not need to be complete, only imperfect enough to have direction. When we look at the cosmic web, we do not see chaos. We see rhythm, dense regions, empty regions, connecting paths, open spaces that allow movement. And through it all, there is no privileged center, no favored position, just as in your mind right now. There is no need to focus on a single thought. No need to hold anything in place. Let the flow continue. The universe took billions of years to move from tiny fluctuations to spiraling galaxies, star clusters, and quiet planets. It was not in a hurry. It did not need to know the outcome in advance. In the next chapter, we will step into another growing emptiness, dark energy, accelerated expansion, and the distant fate of all structures. But for now, you do not need to follow it that far. Let your thoughts settle like a galaxy that has found its orbit. The imperfections have completed their work. The web has been woven. And you only need to be here in this quiet moment, allowing sleep to arrive as a natural consequence of letting go. When the cosmic web has been fully woven, its galactic filaments, its dense nodes, its vast open voids, a very quiet question returns: what is pulling everything apart? Not the filaments, not the nodes, but the emptiness itself. In our familiar intuition, emptiness is passive. It does nothing. It does not push. It does not pull. Yet the universe has chosen another path. Observations of distant supernovae reveal that the expansion of the universe is not slowing down as we once thought, but accelerating. Distances are not merely increasing, they are increasing faster over time. This does not come from galaxies. It does not come from dark matter. It comes from empty space itself. What we call dark energy is not an object. It has no shape. It does not shine. It leaves no direct trace. And yet it accounts for about 68% of the universe's total energy. A new kind of nothing, no longer a quiet background, but a source of outward push. Here, space is no longer just a stage. It is an actor. Every new meter of space that comes into being carries with it a small amount of energy. And as the universe expands, the total amount of dark energy grows like a whisper, becoming gradually clearer. This can feel unsettling if we think in the usual human way that everything should eventually settle, that motion should run out. But the universe does not share that intuition. It continues to open, quietly, without purpose. Albert Einstein once introduced the cosmological constant into his equations to keep the universe still, then later called it his greatest mistake. But perhaps the universe never wanted to be still. Emptiness is not the enemy of structure. It is the condition for movement. In the very long run, dark energy will come to dominate completely. Galaxies will drift apart. Clusters will dissolve. The night sky, if there is still anyone left to look, will grow darker, poorer. A future that is cold, thin, and isolated. Not a violent ending, not a cosmic tragedy, just a gradual thinning. Like a room left with its window open for a long time, sound leaves first, then scent, then warmth. What remains is stillness. In that distant future, the last stars will fade, black holes will evaporate very slowly, and the universe will move toward a state with almost no events at all. But what matters here is not the coldness, it is the patience. The universe does not rush toward its end. It opens until movement itself no longer has a reason to collide. The philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Everything is ephemeral fame, and the famous as well." In the light of dark energy, these words do not sound pessimistic. They feel liberating. If all structures eventually thin out, then there is nothing that must be held too tightly, nothing that must be clung to. And if 68% of the universe is a form of nothing that is quietly pushing everything apart, then nothingness is no longer absence. It is momentum, an emptiness that does not need to be filled, only allowed to exist. At a deeper level, this touches very closely on inner life. Not every empty space within you needs to be filled with meaning, with plans, with explanations. Some spaces are simply doing their work, creating room so you are not compressed between too many structures. Dark energy does not destroy the universe. It decompresses it. It allows things not to remain close forever, not to collide endlessly, not to hold their shape indefinitely. And on this very quiet night, as you listen to this story, you may allow a little nothing to remain within you as well. No name, no purpose, just a space wide enough that thoughts do not crowd each other, memories do not strain, and tomorrow does not need to arrive yet. In the final chapter, we will not seek more evidence nor open new theories. We will return to the original question about nothingness, about existence, not to answer it, but to set it down. For now, let your thoughts grow sparse like galaxies in the far future. Emptiness will not harm you. It is simply opening so that you have room to rest. After passing through the deeper layers of science and philosophy, after touching the edges where language itself begins to grow weary, perhaps the gentlest thing we can do now is not to try to say anything more. Because if there is one thing this entire journey has been quietly whispering, it is this: science does not speak of absolute nothingness. It speaks of structured emptiness, of ground states filled with energy, of conditions that carry potential. Nothing in the language of physics has never been a dead void. It always vibrates ever so slightly. It always carries the possibility of becoming something else. The quantum vacuum does not stand still. Empty space is not passive. Time, even at its beginning, does not need a before to justify its existence. And when we look back over the whole story, we can see that every time human thought tries to grasp nothingness, nothingness reveals yet another deeper layer of being. The philosopher Martin Heidegger once wrote, "Why are there beings at all instead of nothing?" That question is not answered by science, and perhaps it does not need to be. Because each time we try to enclose it within an explanation, we shrink the very space in which the question can breathe. There are questions that are not born to have final answers. They are born to open a space where we no longer need to prove, no longer need to hold on, no longer need to reach the end. Spinoza once wrote, "The more we understand individual things, the more we understand God." But perhaps the mirror of understanding is the permission not to understand. Not as surrender, but as recognition that there are layers of reality that only appear when we stop trying to pull them toward ourselves. Throughout this journey, we have watched nothing change its shape again and again, from a concept that troubles language to a fear with an ancient philosophy, from an imagined vacuum to a quantum ground alive with fluctuations, from a moment of origin to a phase in a cosmic cycle. from passive emptiness to dark energy quietly pushing everything apart. At every level, nothing refuses to become completely empty. And perhaps this mirrors the human experience with striking accuracy. There are moments when you feel empty, tired, hollow. But if you look slowly enough, those spaces have never been absolute nothingness. They carry rest, transition, a breath between two breaths. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." Perhaps the nothingness we fear is not a place where there is nothing, but a place where there is no longer noise to cover ourselves. And when the noise fades, we often rush to fill the silence with meaning, with goals, with explanations. Yet the universe has offered us a very quiet lesson. Not every empty space needs to be filled. Some spaces only need to be left alone. At its deepest level, science does not bring comfort through final answers. It brings comfort through its willingness to admit what it does not yet know. And in that admission, there is a rare and beautiful humility. The universe does not need to explain itself in order to continue existing. It existed long before anyone asked, and so do you. You do not need to fully understand your life in order to be allowed to rest. You do not need to name every feeling, conclude every thought, or close every story. Here, there is no summary, no final message, no instruction to remember. There is only a question that remains open, not like a door you must walk through, but like a window through which the night can enter. Why is there existence? That question can remain out there. It does not need to follow you into sleep. The voice may slow now, not because everything has been said, but because there is nothing more that needs to be said. The ideas have finished their work, not to be remembered, but to open a space of quiet. You do not need to carry the universe with you. You do not need to carry philosophy. You do not need to carry nothing or something. All of that will remain even when you are no longer thinking about it. And if the universe is never truly empty, then tonight you do not need to fill yourself either. Let the stars continue their distant work. Let the spaces continue to open very slowly. And you simply remain here in this moment where no answer is required, no conclusion is needed, and no further thought must arise. There is no ending here, only a silence gentle enough for sleep to arrive on its own.